Welcome back to The Truth of Money, where we follow the money to find the truth the mainstream media won't tell you. I want you to do something for me. Picture the most valuable company you can think of. Maybe it's Apple, $3 trillion. Or maybe it's Nvidia, riding the AI wave at $3.5 trillion. Now, I want you to add them together, then add Microsoft, then Amazon, then throw in Saudi Aramco for good measure. You're still not even close. There's a company, Dutch, 4 centuries old, that at its peak was worth more than all of them combined, $7.9 trillion in today's money. But here's what haunts me. It's not the valuation that changed history, it's what they invented to reach it. See, when we talk about power, we talk about the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, old money, royal bloodlines. But there's a family you've never heard of, a Dutch dynasty that didn't just accumulate wealth. They architectured the system itself. They created the first corporation, the first stock market, the first IPO. They turned war into profit, trade into sovereignty, and monarchy into something else entirely. This is the story of the Dutch East India Company and the House of Orange. And by the time we're done, you'll see their fingerprints on every transaction you've ever made, every stock you've ever bought, every corporation that's ever exploited a legal loophole. This isn't just history. This is the blueprint. Let's go back to where it all began. 1580, the Iberian Peninsula. Spain doesn't just conquer Portugal, it absorbs it. And overnight, the world's two greatest empires merge into a superpower that makes today's geopolitical players look like children playing Risk. But here's what the history books miss. The Dutch weren't just worried, they were existentially terrified. See, the Dutch at this time? Technically part of Spain, but fighting, bleeding for independence. And now, suddenly, they're facing an empire that controls the spice routes of Asia, the silver mines of South America, the slave ports of Africa, the entire Atlantic trade network. So here's the question that keeps me up at night. How do you fight an empire when you don't have an empire? The Dutch answer? You don't match guns with guns. You build a weapon they've never seen before. In 1602, 7 competing Dutch trading companies did something insane. They merged, but not into a company, into a sovereign hybrid, the VOC, Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, the Dutch East India Company. And I need you to understand, this wasn't a business. This was a parallel state with a profit motive. They could sign international treaties, raise armies, declare war, mint currency, establish colonies, execute prisoners. Think about that. A company with the powers of a nation-state. But here's where it gets truly revolutionary. They didn't fund this through kings or nobles or taxes. They funded it through you. Well, the 1602 version of you. And that decision, that single structural innovation, changed everything. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean layered. See, everyone focuses on the VOC, the merchants, the traders, the capitalists, but they're missing the structural foundation, the silent architects, the House of Orange Nassau. And no, I'm not talking about a fruit company. I'm talking about one of Europe's most fascinating power experiments. Picture this. You're a noble dynasty, but you have no kingdom, no crown, just a title, stadholder, which is basically a placeholder position in a merchant republic that doesn't really want you. Amsterdam's elite? They want less monarchy, not more. Spain? They want you dead. And you? You have no land to tax, no mines to exploit, no divine right to invoke. So what do? You do what any smart power does when the old rules stop working. You change the game entirely. The House of Orange couldn't compete on feudalism, so they didn't try. Instead, they made a bet that would echo for 4 centuries. What if power didn't come from land, but from capital? They didn't run the VOC, but they bankrolled it. They sat on its boards. They married into merchant families, and decades later, William IV and V, direct descendants of Orange, they became presidents of both the VOC and the West India Company. Think about the elegance of this. No revolution required. No blood spilled. Well, not their blood. No messy succession crisis, just structural positioning. They embedded themselves into the source code of Dutch capitalism. And when that capitalism scaled, they scaled with it. But to understand how it scaled, we need to talk about something that didn't exist before 1602. Something we now take completely for granted. August 1602. The VOC does something that had literally never been done in human history. They open their doors to the public. Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, an IPO, cool. We have those now. But you're missing the cognitive leap this required. Before this moment, if you wanted to fund a voyage, you'd find a rich patron. Fund one specific voyage, wait 2 to 3 years. Hope the ship doesn't sink. Split the profits. Start over every single time. The VOC said, what if we flip the model? What if instead of funding voyages, people funded the company itself? What if ownership was permanent, not temporary? What if you could trade that ownership to someone else? What if risk was pooled across hundreds of voyages instead of one? This is the moment. This is the financial singularity. Because overnight, you've created one. Permanent capital money that doesn't disappear after one voyage. It compounds. 2. Transferable ownership. For the first time ever, you can sell your stake to someone else. Which means 3. A secondary market. The Amsterdam Stock Exchange. The world's first. Where shares trade hands in a building that still stands today. But then, the Dutch did something darker. Something we're still dealing with. They didn't just trade shares, they started betting on the future price of shares. Options contracts. Short-selling futures derivatives margin trading arbitrage. Every tool Wall Street uses today? Born in Amsterdam, 1602 to 1650. But here's the thing about speculation. It requires confidence. And confidence requires protection. So the VOC invented something else. Something that would change investing forever. Limited liability. If you bought VOC shares and the company collapsed, you only lost what you put in. Not your house, not your farm, not your family's future. Your personal assets were separated from the company's assets. Do you understand what this unlocked? Suddenly everyone could invest. Not just the ultra-wealthy who could absorb total loss, but regular people, merchants, artisans, widows. And when you let regular people invest, when you pool their capital, when you protect them from catastrophic loss, when you let them trade freely, you get FOMO. VOC shares started at an index of 100 in 1602. By the 1720s, 1,000, a 10 times return over a century. Stable, reliable, world-dominating. But the VOC's influence didn't stay in Amsterdam. It metastasized. 1688. England is in crisis. King James II, Catholic, authoritarian, losing support fast. Parliament is freaking out. They need a Protestant with royal blood. They turn to Mary, James's daughter, who happens to be married to William of Orange. Now pay attention, because this is where the VOC's institutional DNA jumps continents. William doesn't just take the English throne, he brings the Dutch financial playbook with him. Within years of William's reign, England creates the Bank of England, 1694, launches government bonds, establishes public credit markets, funds wars through capital markets instead of royal treasuries. This is the Glorious Revolution. Not just political, financial. Dutch innovation, now encoded into British law. But here's what blows my mind. The DNA doesn't stop there. A VOC ship, the Halfman, sails into a harbor we now call New York. 1610. The Dutch West India Company founds New Amsterdam, southern tip of Manhattan. And here's what the Dutch do that's genius. They don't just build a trading post, they build a financial infrastructure. Organized streets still there. Wall Street was literally a wall. Credit systems, contract law, trade networks. Immigrant integration, diversity as economic strategy. 1664. But, and this is critical, they don't erase the Dutch structure. They absorb it. Because it works. So now you have Amsterdam's banking and credit systems, London's securities and speculation markets, New York's geographic position, and immigrant capital. And over centuries, these three cities synchronize. Amsterdam and London start cooperating in the 1700s. Dutch capital flows to British markets. British markets innovate on Dutch stability. And New York? New York inherits both. The legal structures, the credit customs, the institutional habits. New York didn't invent finance. It absorbed the code that made Europe's financial centers dominant. Which brings us to today, and a question that should terrify you. The VOC collapsed in 1795. Nationalized by the Dutch government. Bankrupt, corrupt, overextended. Nearly 2 centuries of dominance ended. But here's the thing about structural power. It doesn't die, it transforms. Today, the Netherlands. $4.3 trillion in inward foreign investment. $5.2 trillion in outward foreign investment. $3.5 trillion in holdings abroad. That's a country with fewer people than California, holding more global assets than most G20 nations. And who's still there, quietly embedded in Dutch industry? The House of Orange-Nassau. They still reign. Ceremonial? Sure. But their board positions, their trust funds, their investment vehicles, their connections to companies like Shell? Not ceremonial. 1907. Royal Dutch merges with Shell, creates Royal Dutch Shell. Notice the name? Royal Dutch. ING Group. One of Europe's most powerful financial institutions. Dutch roots. The merchants who tied their fortunes to the VOC? Their descendants sit on boards today, shape policy through foundations, move capital through networks most people will never see. Their names don't make headlines, but their blueprints are everywhere. But we need to talk about the cost, because the VOC didn't just innovate finance, it weaponized it. The Banda Islands, near total extermination of the indigenous population. Survivors enslaved. The Amboina Massacre. English and Japanese traders executed on accusations of conspiracy. The Batavia Massacre. Thousands of Chinese civilians killed in what's now Jakarta. Forced labor in spice regions. Violent suppression of resistance. Entire political structures dismantled. The VOC pioneered financial instruments. But it also pioneered corporate atrocity at scale. Limited liability meant investors faced no personal consequences for company crimes. Structural distance between capital and violence. Sound familiar? So here's what keeps me up at night. The VOC proved something terrifying. Capital can replace monarchy. Markets can function as sovereign power. And the House of Orange understood this before anyone else. Today, we don't live under kings, but do we live under markets when a company can be worth more than most nations' GDP? When financial instruments can collapse economies? When the architecture of power is invisible, encoded in legal structures and investment vehicles? Who governs the markets? Who holds the crown when the crown is invisible? The VOC is gone, but its model never left. We're still living inside the structure the Dutch built. The stock market you check on your phone, the corporation that employs you, the limited liability that protects or shields investors from consequences. 400 years later, we're all trading on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. We just call it something else now. If you made it this far, leave an orange in the comments. Not just because of the House of Orange, but because you understand something most people don't. The real power has always been structural, and it's still here. If this kind of analysis hits different for you, watch my deep dive on the Warburgs next. Another family, another invisible architecture, another layer of the system. We're building something here. If you made it this far, leave an orange in the comments. Not just because of the House of Orange, but because you understand something most people don't. The real power has always been structural, and it's still here. If this kind of analysis hits different for you, watch my deep dive on the Warburgs next. Another family, another invisible architecture, another layer of the system. We're building something here. Let's go.